So this is the video that I didn't want to make. What I should be doing is talking you through my GoPro 8-inch build and what we learned and what I've experienced and whether I thought it was any good. But instead I'm doing a video on how not to be a pillock and lose your quad, which is a bit annoying. If you followed my, or if you saw my community post, you'll know that I lost the GEP on its maiden flights, pack 3 or 4 I think it was, in an open spot. And this video is basically just going to show you what happened, but more importantly I'm going to start this video by explaining what I didn't do and what I should have done, and hopefully if you like me and complacency sort of set in, then maybe this will just be a little reminder of what we should do and paying attention when we're building and flying. And the reason why I lost my quad is 2 issues. One, I put a self-powered buzzer in all my quads, either the Vifly or something of that sort. So if you lose your quad and the battery gets disconnected, a beep will sound and you'll find your quad really easily. So that's the number one thing. I thought I had one, but the one that I had was faulty. And because I was going on a gentle test flight, I wasn't particularly worried. So that's just one of those things. The other one is more annoying and involves GPS logging. And the quad had GPS on it, of course, which was linked to my on-screen display so I could see it, but I didn't enable GPS logging in my Tyrannus, which I've got on all my other GPS enabled quads. So let's start off this video by quickly showing you how to do this in case you don't know, and then we'll go on to my absolute failure of a test flight. So it's dead easy to do. I'll put the link below. Basically just click the link, go onto GitHub and basically download the file here, which somebody has kindly made, which is just a little Lua script which will give us the last 4 positions, GPS positions, should we crash and disconnect the battery. So just download the zip file, open up the folder you've downloaded, extract the files, and all you want to do is open this up, copy the GPS Lua, you can use the other files to enable more difficult things, and all I'm going to do is copy it into telemetry. And here you can see my models, and outside I've got my 7-inch Crocodile plugged in with the GPS cords already set up, and all I'm going to do is go into that model, scroll across, go into telemetry, and at this point just make sure that you're getting telemetry, and there you can see I've got my GPS coordinates. And if we go along one page, you can see mine's already set up. You basically just select script and basically go to here and select GPS, and that is pretty much it. And what that will do is, if you go back into your model and hold down, in this case, the page file, and there you can see it's logging the last 4 positions, and essentially if the quad crashes, this page will just freeze, and you can just either take a screenshot of your Tyrannus and obviously save it on your phone or whatever, or keep your Tyrannus on and just go on looking for it, and obviously the last number is the last known coordinate of your quad. And the gutting thing for me is that everything was set up, but because I created a new model for the 8-inch, I forgot to add on and set GPS tracking. And it's as simple as that. If I'd have done this, which I didn't even have to sort of go through the download steps or anything like that, just copy the model and set it up again, I wouldn't have lost my quad. So it's as simple as that. Don't be a prat, just spend that extra 30 seconds and make sure everything is sorted out, and that's all you need. There are fancier ones than this. You can get it to store almost like on an Excel file within your Tyrannus, and then you can use proper logging and do it via the OpenTX companion. But this is all I use, because I just basically need my last coordinate of where my quad went down. And as I said, if I'd have had this, then I would have been able to walk within a couple of meters of it and find it really easily, whereas on the DVR I could only see it prior to losing video, which after I'd punched out basically meant that the quad would be, you know, potentially anywhere within 100 meters, which in that location made it impossible to find. So I'll show you what actually happened now. Yeah, and it was just one of those sort of freak things, really. My plan when I went to this place was I was going to do some proximity and get some nice FPV footage. I took a load of quads, I took all my batteries, and my idea was just to walk past my normal spot to this big open field and just put maybe 3 or 4 packs through the gap 8-inch, make sure everything was working okay. So I started off basically with a 4S cell and then went on to 6S, and the immediate thing you'll notice is I'm getting a lot of jello in my FPV feed, which is pretty common on bigger quads from what I know. In this case it's probably made worse by the fact that I'm using the ichabod's 3D printed bulkhead and running the camera and the hero at the front of the quad, which obviously on this particular size of quad is a little bit too much. But the hero itself has got an ND16 filter on, so at this point I sort of carry on, and I'm sort of thinking, well, if the hero footage looks okay with the ND filter on, then we'll call it a win. And because I'm using a Caddx ratel, I can always put the ND filter that some of the ratels come with on there. So I'm not particularly worried at this point. The quad has a lot of vibration, which bigger quads do, and I'm running this on RC Cyclone 7056 simply because they're the 7-inch props that don't flatten out on my other 7-inch. I haven't used the 8-inch props I bought simply because they cost a fortune for the HQ ones, and I don't want to sort of wreck them on a, you know, if anything goes wrong. So basically I just start out getting a feel for the quad on 4S. Obviously it's got no power on 4S, but it still flies absolutely fine. It would be fine for long range. And then I flip to 6S, and despite the jello you're seeing in the FPV feed, the quad feels really smooth. It feels sort of, compared to my lighter 5-inch quads, which feel alive and light, this feels sort of like you're driving a lorry instead of, you know, a Lotus. Not in a bad way, it just feels big and slow and stable. But despite feeling slow, it's actually really quick, and you find this on bigger quads. I get this a lot when I fly my Gap. You feel like you're sort of just tootling along, and then you come up to a tree and realise that actually you're going really quick because they just have a faster cruising speed, which is why 8-inch and 7-inch are so popular for long range people. You can cruise really fastly using hardly any gas. So I make a few tweaks I land and I make a few tweaks in Betaflight, basically just dropping P down and increasing I and dropping D down, because my motors are pretty warm. They're not dangerously warm, they're not burning to the touch, but they're warmer than I would generally like. I prefer cool motors, and because this is my first big quad, I just want to play it safe. So I make some tweaks and then I set off again, and at this point I'm not expecting any issues. I'm in a big open area, I've got crystal clear FPV footage, although you'll notice that there are some black flickers which are slightly possibly worrying. That tends to be either a ground issue, which it isn't in this case, or maybe the filter settings. So I've slightly dropped or should I say slightly increased the filtering on the quad, and I'm just mooching along, and you'll see me sort of swing left, and basically what happens here is I go behind this big wood. And generally what happens with FPV feed when it's going, you'll get the telltale sign of snow and flickers and things like that. But in this case I don't. Within sort of a second or two I go from perfect clear FPV footage to nothing at all. And my instant reaction at this point is punch out and bring myself within half a second above that tree line, which is what I do. But for some reason the FPV footage doesn't come back, and while I'm punching out, I'm also yaw spinning the quad to try and bring the antenna out of its null point or out of its weak point to try and bring back my video. But of course I'm flying a very powerful 8-inch quad with 7-inch props, and by the time I realise this isn't coming back and disarm, I already know it's game over for this quad. Simply because this maze field is so impenetrable that you sort of have to force your way through it, and because it's so thick you can't see the ground without sort of crouching down. You can really only see, you know, half a metre either side of you. So there onwards I spend, oh actually what I do now is I get one of my other quads and take off, and in the hope that, you know, it's on top of the maze or something like that. And I'm running rapid fire, and the way I'm running rapid fire actually is not with the docking, because my plan was to do a bit of testing with the Fat Sharks versus the Skyzones, and also with rapid fire versus the Skyzone receivers. So I've basically got two sets of goggles on my head with an AV wire between them, and I'm looking through the Skyzones and basically picking up the feed from the Fat Sharks. Immediately after taking off with my other quad, which is using a Foxeer Predator V2 or V3, the FPV feed or the FPV image is so much worse than the Caddx, and it's really highlighted by the Skyzone goggles, which of course have much better screens. I sort of give it up within a few seconds because I know that I just can't see enough, even with pretty much zero camera angle, to see it. And I spend the next sort of 2 or 3 hours searching for the quad. Some of the guys from Norfolk FPV offer to come down and help me look, but I sort of know it's game over. I am not finding this quad until this maze field is cut down, and at that point hopefully I'll find the hero, which is the big blow, and I'll find whatever's left of the quad. So you can see I've changed the GEP-RC quite a bit from how it was originally set up. I've basically removed the camera plates and used the Bulkhead 3D printed mount from the ichabod and the Hero 7 3D printed case from the ichabod to give myself more top plate space, because the idea of this quad is that I'm going to use it to test the 8S, and my idea was to just use two 1500 4S packs running in series, and I could fit both of those just on the top mount, on the top plates, by running the Hero 7 this way. In future it would have also allowed me to run maybe two 5S packs in parallel, one on top, one below. It just freed up a lot of space that was otherwise eaten up by the GoPro Hero mount, which I subsequently printed off. Longer term, the plan was to basically drop the top stack, which I think was 35mm, maybe down to 25mm or something like that, and just basically sex this frame up a bit, make this frame prettier, because it's a pretty ugly frame as frames go. I'm not a fan of the huge sort of bus style quads, and because we're going to be carrying a hell of a lot of weight in batteries, I'd rather that weight be more centralised, although of course, as I said, I could run one below and one above, which would negate that. In terms of the layout, I've been a little bit sort of creative. I've stuck the Racerstar ESC in the middle, but because the arms eat up so much space by sitting within the frame, it didn't leave me a huge amount of space for a flight control and stuff like that. In fairness, I had plenty of space to do it, but I just didn't like the way that I would have ended up with a sky high tower. I played around with the idea of building this frame inverted, sort of like God's frame or something like that, which you can do. And I also played around with the idea of putting the arms on the outside of the frame, but in the end I just thought I'd sort of build it more in a sort of line, more in a modular way, in the way that I've built quite a few other quads. So at the front of this frame there are a number of 20 by 20 mount holes, but they don't match the 4 holes that you need to run a 20 by 20 flight controller. There's only one set of them. So all I simply did is use 2 bolts to the front of the flight controller, and then at the back of the flight controller I simply attached the back of the flight controller to basically a 3D printed little part with a bit of foam tape on it, and that will work absolutely fine. And it meant that in the future I could lower this stack down. So we're using the Matek F722 SE Mini, which is a full-featured flight controller despite its size, and it comes with sort of like almost like a cage for itself. So if you wish to do so, you can use it as a 30.5mm flight controller or a 20 by 20 flight controller. And the reason why I picked this guy is it claims to cope with up to 8S. So I thought, as part of this testing, let's see if Matek's claims are true and whether it will accept direct 8S voltage. So I thought it'd be a fun thing to do, see if we could blow it up. The flight controller itself, the layout I really like. This is a flight controller with dual gyros in SPI formats, so you can sort of run both together if you wish to do so. To me, that whole setup is a bit of a marketing scam, but despite that, I really like the board itself. You've got 2, it can run dual cameras, it's got pretty much everything you want, it's got 4 or 5 UARTs. For such a small flight controller, it's really, really good. The pads on it are the thing I like the most. Unlike most 20 by 20 flight controllers, where the pads are super thin and sat on top of the flight controller, and if you're unlucky or you use too hot a soldering iron, or you're having to resolder the same point a number of times over the course of its lifespan, it can be very easy to lift a pad. Whereas this one, you've got the pads on top, but they also run down the side of the board. So when you're soldering, you basically put a small blob onto the top of the pad and then down the side as well, which in this case meant that I could solder my wires to the side of the board and take it away from the front bulkhead. So I really like the flight controller. I think it's got a nice layout, it's got tons of features, and as I said, you can run it as a full-size flight controller by bridging or using the mounts, or you can use it as a 20 by 20. Testing the Matek new Mini VTX, which I just got in, which is a little 20 by 20 VTX with an MMCX connector on it, and it's pretty cheap. And the one thing I really like about it is it uses solder connections, so you don't have to mess around with connectors, which if you've ever tried to wire up a TBS Unify that you found in your drawer and you can't find the right plug for it, it just makes life a lot easier. It uses the TRAMP protocol, and that worked absolutely fine in my case, and it will go up to 800 milliwatt. And one of the reasons why I was using it is again to see if it would take 8S and how it compared versus the Unifys, because in the last couple of weeks I've ripped off 2 UFL connectors from my Unifys, and I'm getting a bit annoyed soldering them back on and then attaching them with extra solder and all the rest of it. So I thought if the Matek board worked, or the Matek VTX worked relatively well, I'd use it a lot going forward. So that's it for this video. Apologies, it's a bit dry and long-winded with static photographs, but I've kind of tried to make it or make the best out of a bad situation. So yeah, don't be lazy like me, don't be complacent, make sure you set up properly for new spots, which this was to me. So that's it from me. Fly safe, fly happy, and don't be a pillock. Cheers guys, thanks, bye bye.